And go ahead, Paul, take it away.
All right, thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Again, my name is Paul Macera, and I am the Program Manager for the California Water Plan. What I'd like to do is give you just a brief bit of background and context on the material that will be presented to you today, also a little bit on its importance and application going forward in terms of groundwater management in California. First of all, I want to emphasize that this information has been developed through the water plan update process. This work began basically when the scoping began for the state's last water plan update, update 2013. And during that scoping process, we heard from many, many stakeholders suggesting we really need to augment and enhance the groundwater information. And obviously staff and management concurred. And so that is the way that we approached update 2013. We convened a Groundwater Caucus, which was actually the largest of 7 or 8 caucuses that were developed and one of the most active. And so this information is a continuation of the work that has been queued up and pursued throughout the Water Plan Update 2013. There's a lot of new information to the water plan, which you'll hear about today. And again, the focus on today's discussion is the regional aspects for the Sacramento River, San Francisco Bay, and South Coast hydrologic regions. And then lastly, I just wanted to emphasize the utility and importance of this information that you'll soon hear about. Obviously, a lot of significant occurrences have played out recently in terms of California groundwater. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act will be informed. Implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of 2014 will be informed by this information. Also, the department will be updating Bulletin 118, which is the state's groundwater plan, and this information will be foundational for that update. And then also, of course, the governor's water action plan, implementation of that plan will be informed and supported through the content that you'll be hearing about today. And with that, I'll turn it back over. And again, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead then and jump right into the presentation. Roy Hall, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away.
Hi, my name is Roy Hall. I'm an engineering geologist in the Northern Region Office up in Red Bluff, California. I'll be taking you through this presentation where we're going to talk about San Francisco Bay, South Coast, and the Sacramento River hydrologic regions. The California Water Plan was developed over the last couple of years, and we've been working under the direction of Abdul, Dan, and Lou. The team was a very large team, and it was made up of several members from across all the regional offices, along with the integrated regional water management and other organizations throughout the DWR. During the process of gathering data and setting things up and putting together the report, DWR employed the use of the communication and outreach process to form a topic-based Groundwater Caucus. The Groundwater Caucus provided DWR team with significant input on the compilation, the synthesis, and the presentation of the groundwater information. The caucus included 60 members, including ag, urban, environmental interests, along with state, federal, and local agencies. This is a chronological history of groundwater content in the California Water Plan beginning in 1957. With each update, as groundwater use increased in California, so has the extent of groundwater information presented. I don't want to go over the entire list because it was talked about in the earlier presentations, but I do want to highlight several key items that I feel put California Water Plan on the path that led to the release of this enhanced report. In 1983, limitations in data concerning groundwater was a keynote. Why is that significant? Well, when it comes to groundwater, one cannot learn enough, and in many ways, our understanding is limited by the data we have. For this report, we filled in many of the gaps, but we uncovered many more. In 1993, it was extremely significant because the water plan provided the first estimates of groundwater use, but it also was the first time it provided it for each of the hydrologic regions. Not shown, but extremely important to 2013 groundwater update, is the 2003 Bulletin 118. This particular document provided the first compilation of groundwater information from around the state and was used as a jumping point for the 2013 update. In 2009, it was recommended in that report that future reports include a more enhanced groundwater content. This 2013 update is our response to that recommendation. Welcome to the 2013 update. We had three main goals. The first was to steadily improve statewide understanding of groundwater, along both regional and statewide, and also understand how groundwater is being managed. The second goal was to identify data gaps and also challenges to groundwater management. And the last was to develop recommendations to improve groundwater management in California. We set up the groundwater update in a very easy and simple to follow organization. One section was called the findings, gaps, and recommendations. The second was the scope and future directions. Chapter 2, which you've already heard from, is the statewide update. And then we had individual chapters for each of the different hydrologic regions. Earlier you heard about San Joaquin, Tulare Lake, and Central Coast. And today, again, we're going to focus on the San Francisco Bay, South Coast, and Sacramento River. We also will be producing appendices that will cover a lot more detail on some of the features that we're including in the report. The final CASGEM basin prioritization, groundwater use data, changes in groundwater and storage data, and land subsidence. Each of the reports are organized very similar, and we broke it down into all these different categories. There's always going to be an introduction. There's going to be findings for each of the hydrologic regions, data gaps, and recommendations. And then we're going to talk about groundwater supply and development, go into detail on the various alluvial aquifers that are important and key in each of the regions. We're also going to have discussions for the first time on fractured rock aquifers, well infrastructure, and CASGEM basin prioritization. There will be a discussion on groundwater supply, where we talk about the average annual water use, along with the changes in annual groundwater supply. And groundwater monitoring will cover various aspects of what's going on around the state. For this presentation, I only have 45 minutes, so I have to keep it short. We're only going to focus on well infrastructure, CASGEM basin prioritization, and groundwater supply. In addition, there are sections dealing with aquifer conditions, where we talk about groundwater levels, changes in storage, any trends, groundwater quality, land subsidence, and then we have an extensive section on groundwater management within each of the hydrologic regions, and we'll cover some of these. And then there'll be conjunctive use and then references. Again, due to the timing, I'm only going to focus on some of these aquifer condition sections and groundwater management. So this presentation, like I said, it's broken into 3 different hydrologic regions, which presents some challenges trying to organize the data. So I'm going to do it topic-based, and then I'll discuss each of the regions within that topic separately to make it a little bit easier and simpler to follow. The first thing we're going to talk about is well infrastructure and distribution. The graph on the lower left is the number of wells that were installed since 1977 through 2010, and they're also broken down by use. The pie chart in the upper right represents basically the summary of the different types and the percentages associated with it. And then the bar chart in the bottom right is also deals with the well logs, but it's also broken down by counties and by type. So in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of the first things you notice is that about around 1984 underground storage tank program began, which required a lot of monitoring wells to be installed for water quality measures. And you can see that huge increase in the amount of monitoring wells. San Francisco Bay Area is more urban. One would expect more monitoring wells, and we see it. Also, you can notice that one of the data gaps we have is the lack of well logs being submitted, and you can see that it's very evident in the early part, late part of the 1970s, where we received very few. Housing trends is another thing that we can sometimes detect in some of these wells, or excuse me, in these well logs. And in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's not as prevalent as some of the other hydrologic regions. We do see little bumps in the late 80s and a little bump in the late 90s with respect to domestic wells. But majority of the people in the Bay Area typically are on urban water systems, so we don't see too many domestic wells being put in. And again, since it's a heavily populated area, there's significantly more monitoring going on, and Santa Clara and Alameda counties are probably leading with respect to all the different monitoring wells. South Coast. Okay, we got a little bit better response with respect to the well completion reports. We don't have that same situation in the early 70s like we've seen in San Francisco Bay Area, but in this particular case, you can also see the dry years in 87 to 80 or 92, and that's usually more indicative of the ag wells. They tend to increase during the dry years because of changes in surface water supplies, and you can see that there. And then we also have the underground storage tank program that began in the early 80s and still continues till today. Now, we do see a little bit more housing trends showing up in the domestic wells in that time period of the late 80s and slightly in the 2000s, but not nearly as much. Most of the domestic wells are occurring in the San Diego County. And another thing you might notice here is the number of monitoring wells has decreased. It is not the 66% that we saw in San Francisco. It's now down to 43, but domestic is now making up a larger percentage. Sacramento, which is not nearly as much urban area, so we see a lot more domestic wells, fewer monitoring wells, and we also see more ag wells as a result of the more urban, or excuse me, more rural area. And we do see the evidence of some of the dry years. In the late 70s, it shows up very clearly with the increases in the number of ag production wells. And we also see it showing up in the late 80s, early 90s. We do see some ag wells increasing in the late 70s, or excuse me, 2007 to 2009, but we're not confident that that's an indication of drought at that point, or at least dry periods. Monitoring. Well, we don't have nearly as many major cities and things like that around the Sacramento River hydrologic region, but we do have some monitoring going on, and you can see it also begins in the early 90s. New housing wells are showing up much more prominent in the Sacramento River. You can see huge spikes in the domestic wells in both the late 80s into the early 90s as well as the early 2000s. And you can also, we've done a complete switch from the San Francisco region where domestic wells now represent 72% of all the wells being installed as opposed to monitoring only 15%. The mountainous areas such as Nevada, El Dorado, Placer, the foothills, things like that, they're showing the greatest number of domestic wells, but also in the Central Valley with Shasta, Tehama, and Butte are also showing quite a few domestic wells. Butte is picking up the majority of all the irrigation wells by volume here. Now we'll go on to basin prioritization. Statewide, there's 515 alluvial basins and subbasins. When CASGEM legislation was signed in 2009 and implemented, one of the objectives was to assess each of the basins to determine the priority of very low, low, medium, or high. We looked at every basin and considered the following components: the population of overlying the basin or subbasin, its projected growth, public supply wells, the total number of wells installed, the irrigated acreage overlying that basin, and to the extent at which the overlying basin relies on groundwater, which includes the amount of groundwater being extracted along with the ratio with respect to surface water. We also had to look at other documented impacts such as overdraft, subsidence, saline intrusion, or other water quality degradations. And in some cases, we had other information besides those that we also had to take into consideration. And with the new SGMA legislation, we now need to look at local habitat and local stream flows and whether or not groundwater pumping is causing any impacts. So after we did all that, 127 basins around the state became high and medium priority, and they account for 96% of the annual groundwater supply. 88% of the population are overlying those particular basins, and those 127 basins are subjected to the new SGMA legislation. The remaining 388 low and very low priority basins account for 4% of the groundwater supply and 12% of the population that overlie those basins. You can get more information on particular basins on our Groundwater Information Center under the CASGEM program. Let's talk about San Francisco for a second. There are no high priority basins, but there are 7 medium priority basins, and then there's 26 very low. It's kind of interesting when you look at it. The peninsula, the San Francisco Peninsula, they're all very low, and that's mainly because of the fact that there's very little groundwater use in those particular basins. Most of the groundwater is being produced out of the Santa Clara and then up in the Marin, Sonoma County areas. These 7 basins represent 90% of all the groundwater use within the San Francisco Bay hydrologic region, and they represent 63% of the population. Why only 63? Like I said, most of the population, there's large population centers like the San Francisco Peninsula, but they just don't use enough groundwater. South Coast, it's a little 50-50 with respect to high and medium versus high and low. There's 13 high and 22 medium basins. And many of those high and medium basins are also adjudicated basins. The consistent percentage, 99% of the high and medium basins use the groundwater, and the population is represented by 94. These are a little higher than the statewide averages, especially the population. Population statewide is about 88%. We're running a little higher with 94. But these are very high urban areas, so we expect these numbers to be a little bit higher. Sacramento River, about a third of the basins are high and medium, and pretty much all of them within the Central Valley are high or medium. These basins, there are a few basins along outside, but nearly all the population and water use is within the Central Valley. The high and medium, it's 96% of the groundwater use, not surprising there, and the population is roughly 98%. Groundwater supply data. This is the average between 2005 and 2010. These are the statewide information here for all the hydrologic regions. Again, we're going to focus on the 3, but I just wanted to bring the statewide in for some perspective. 43 million acre-feet of total water is used throughout the state, and groundwater represents 16.5 million acre-feet, which is 38% in a normal year. Like I said, it's averaged between 2005 and 2010. 39% of all the groundwater used, excuse me, let me rephrase that. Groundwater meets 39% of the agricultural use, and it meets 41% of the urban use. San Francisco, we use about 1.25 million acre-feet, and then nearly 1 million of it is met by surface water. So they have a very low groundwater use, only about 250,000, 260,000 acre-feet, and it represents about 21% of the total. Majority of the water used is in the South Bay. These are broken up into 2 planning areas. The South Bay uses the most water, but it has a lower reliance of only 18%. North Bay, again, uses less water total. However, it uses its reliance, about 34% is groundwater. South Coast uses quite a bit more water, 4.7 million acre-feet. Surface water meets 3.1, and the groundwater is represented at about 1.6 million acre-feet, or 34% of the total supply. The majority of the groundwater is used in the metropolitan LA or the Santa Ana planning areas. Even though San Diego uses quite a bit of water, very little water is actually supplied by groundwater, and it represents only 7% of their total water use. Like I said, metropolitan LA and Santa Ana use the bulk of all the groundwater that's pumped out of that particular region. Sacramento, quite a few planning areas. Won't go into all of them, but generally we're averaging about 9 million acre-feet. Surface water meets a little over 6.2 million acre-feet. Groundwater is 2.7, and the majority of the water obviously is used in the Central Valley with the Colusa Basin and the Butte-Sutter-Yuba planning area. The most reliant is in the Lake County area, which is the southwest planning area, which 77% of all the water they use is supplied by groundwater. And the least reliance is the Sacramento Delta area, where there's only about 4% of the groundwater being used. Okay, now we're going to talk. I'm going to combine all 3 of these. There's going to be 3 of these butterfly charts, but I'm going to do them one at a time so that we can see the information as they come up. But I do want to show them as side by side because there's some interesting relationships that you wouldn't normally see. First, we're going to talk about the San Francisco Bay. The blue on that chart represents groundwater. The green represents surface water, and the yellow is reuse. On the right-hand side, that's the total water used. And the charts, as you will see, on the right-hand side, they're not at the same scale. And on the left side of that butterfly is the percent of the water supply. As you see on the San Francisco one, the groundwater use is relatively stable throughout all those years, and there really is no impact to the amount of groundwater in relationship to precip rates. When there's less precip or heavy precip amounts, the groundwater is very stable. So we can say that the groundwater is not there's no relationship to that groundwater to precip rates. Their supply is their surface water supply is what fluctuates depending on the precip year, but they seem to have plenty of surface water, so they don't have to pump extra groundwater in drier years. Now let's take a look at South Coast. South Coast comes along, and you can see their groundwater does fluctuate from year to year, and it is at greatest during the drier periods when they get less rain. Precip 35%, then their groundwater shoots right up. If they go to 143%, their groundwater comes down. And they also tend to have more reuse going on down there. But their surface water supply seems pretty consistent. It's just whenever so you can say that their surface water is hindered when there is less precip, and it's made up with groundwater. And their ratio of groundwater to the surface water is roughly twice as what it is in the San Francisco Bay Area. Groundwater use in South Coast is running about 5 times what it is up in the San Francisco Bay Area. The Sacramento River, on the other hand, has the similar patterns where when there's higher precip, that's less groundwater, and so they're more influenced by precip rates, and they also have a lot of reuse occurring down there. Their ratio is relatively similar to South Coast and running about twice. Groundwater is running about twice the ratio of what we see in the San Francisco Bay Area. Another thing is that they use about 8 times as much groundwater in the Sacramento River as it does up in the San Francisco Bay. This chart is the supply trend. On the brown in this chart is agricultural. The pink would be the urban areas, and the yellow, which is not on this particular chart, but it'll be on the next 2, is the managed wetlands. On the right-hand side, this is the groundwater used by type, whether it's urban or agricultural, and managed wetlands. And again, the scale is not the same on the right-hand side as we look at these 3 charts. On the left side of the chart, it's by percent, agriculture versus urban. San Francisco Bay hydrologic region is mostly urban, so we expect to see a lot of urban water ratio, and we do. It's a much greater. It's running about 30% agricultural to about 70% urban area. Most of the agriculture is occurring in Santa Clara County, and also again up above in Napa, Sonoma, in those general areas. South Coast. Yeah, we see a little bit of managed wetlands on this particular one. Again, we see agricultural, but its scale now is much different. So we see a lot more agriculture occurring, but again, we also see a lot of urban area on this as well. And their ratio is roughly the same, maybe a little bit less agriculture to urban water, which is kind of expected for the urban area that we see in the South Coast. Now, Sacramento River, which uses much more water for agriculture than it does for urban, which is also expected, and we do see a little bit more managed wetlands in here. The agricultural represents 80% of all the water used in that region, which is a huge difference from what we see in those 2 other urban areas. So this is a good relationship between urban and rural areas. We see it, the amounts is nearly 2 million acre-feet is what's being used for ag. This might be a little hard to see, but anyway, this is a spring to 2010 depth to groundwater throughout much of the Sacramento Valley and San Joaquin. We did a much more detailed analysis of the groundwater levels and changing groundwater, as well as changing groundwater and storage. We didn't have enough information to do it for the remaining hydrologic regions, so for this particular section of this presentation, we're only going to focus on the Sacramento River Valley. You can see from this, most groundwater levels are relatively shallow from 0 to 50 feet. That's all that blue, light blue. But we do see slightly deeper pockets that are running 100 to 200 feet on both the west side and the east side, more prominent on the east side of Sacramento. But like I said, we also see some pockets going up the west-hand side where they're a little bit deeper. We also see one just shy of the Redding area up there, and then over here by Chico and south of Oroville. And this is the spring 2010 groundwater elevation and our interpretation of flow directions of the groundwater in those areas in this valley. The levels decrease to near or at sea level below the Sutter Buttes with large depressions on the east and south of the city of Sacramento. Groundwater flows are expected to be south and toward the center for most of the valley. The flow pattern has been altered to flow in the directions of these depressions. As you can see, as you get closer to the Sacramento area, the flow directions tend to migrate to some degree to the east side to try to fill in that depression, as where it would normally flow out through the delta. We also did, through a project to determine the change in groundwater within storage. We looked at groundwater levels, compared the two, and then we looked at and came up with basically an average or range that we would use for the specific yield. In this particular case, we looked at two different ranges, two different numbers of 0.07 or 0.17, so that we basically say that the change in groundwater, the amount extracted or the amount that was added, depending on the type of year it was, would be somewhere in between those two numbers. You can see we also added in that top graph the type of water year it was, whether it was a wet year, dry year, critical, dry, and below normal, so that you have some kind of expectation. Since the Sacramento Valley is heavily in ag, and a majority of the water is used in ag, if those years are dry, they tend to pump more groundwater, as you can see in here. In the wet year that it started, we were at a net positive. The green is the high end, and the blue is the low end of that specific yield calculation. But as the years moved on, you can see that the amount that we went deficit all the way through till 2010. So by the time 2010 rolled around, we were at a deficit of about 700,000 acre feet, or 1.7 million, or somewhere in between. And this is a representation of the change in groundwater elevation between spring groundwater levels, spring 2005, and spring 2010. Throughout most of the valley, the groundwater levels, we expected it to decrease based on those water years of the previous chart. So majority of them are within about 10 feet of change, but we do have pockets extending along the west-hand side of the valley where we see much greater depressions, much more greater changes in groundwater elevations, and we see some smaller along the west side, or excuse me, east side as well, and then we see that depression just to the east of Sacramento. Let's take a look at the groundwater level trends. San Francisco Bay Area would be the first one. The wells that we looked at, these were not wells to give us a good characteristic of what's going on in the hydrologic region, but rather some of the management practices that we were trying to capture throughout. That was the theme here, is how is groundwater management, is it being successfully obtained or not? We looked at up here in the northern part of the region, and we can see that the groundwater levels in this hydrograph down here at the bottom are relatively stable because there's a good interaction between surface water and groundwater. B, on the other hand, which is in the same general area, is this hydrograph over here. It's a much deeper well. It's 320 some feet. However, there is no interaction between surface water and groundwater, and it's been declining for quite some time. Nearly 30 years of decline has been occurring at that particular location. And then we see these other ones here, C, E, and F are all examples of the declines going on, and then the introduction of surface water and its relationship to reduced pumping. So we see a lot of good recovery, mainly due to the fact that they were having more access to surface water. South Coast. Again, most of these areas are adjudicated, but we did look at these three hydrographs to see how well things were occurring in those areas. And as you can see in this bottom one, which is represented right here on the upper part of the region, this bottom graph is very well managed. There's a lot of conjunctive management going on in there. And some of their recharge projects include stormwater recharge, and this is highlighted in this little circled area right here. Again, we look at B, and we see declines. They were able to get access to surface water, and then from that point on, they were able to successfully manage groundwater levels. B, on the other hand, down here, there was a significant decline over many years, and again, they were able to access surface water, and through some of the adjudicated processes, were able to manage their groundwaters very successfully. Sacramento River. We have quite a few more. I'll try to go through these. We start up here in Big Valley, which is up in the Lassen County, Modoc County area. And we do see groundwater levels down here at the bottom in this graph down here, where it's been declining since about 1983 on a steady level. Also, the seasonal swings are getting greater and greater and greater, either through increased pumping going on or reduced recharge occurring in that area. We have several multi-completion monitoring wells throughout the valley, and we do give a presentation, two of them here, B and C, which are relatively deep, but what it is just a single well, but it has multiple isolated monitoring wells within it, so we can see what's going on at the various different depths. Now, the first one shows deep groundwater levels are at the highest and shallow at the bottom. So we have a gradients that we can see, along with C, which is reversed, where the shallow wells are the higher groundwater levels, and the deep wells are at lower levels, which has a downward gradient. So we see that the C area would be a very good recharge area. We move on to D. Again, this is another area where it was depressed groundwater levels with the access to the TC, Tehama-Colusa Canal. We were able to see groundwater levels right after the 77 drought area. We see groundwater levels that peaked out again, but due to land use changes, things like that on the west side, we're now starting to see declines occurring in that area again. We also see F, which is in this one down here. This is in an area where there's heavy rice fields, a lot of surface water being applied, so we see very stable groundwater levels. Again, we see areas here where G on the graph is basically southeast of the Sutter Buttes. We see declines going on, but because they were able to get access to surface water, we saw that they basically recovered completely and has been leveling off. We see that in H. We see that in I. I is further down in the valley, surface water applied, and their groundwater levels recovered. J is a little bit different because groundwater levels declined for a long time. It's a mostly ag area, but over the years that ag area has been switching over to urbanizing, and there's more domestic wells, and some of the domestic users are also on public supply systems, which are supplied by surface water. So overall, there was basically a reduction in the amount of groundwater being pumped, which basically leveled that groundwater levels out. Legislation. Over the last 25 years, there's been various sections of legislation that were adopted, and you could pretty much group them into three sets of legislation. The first being the original AB 3030, which was basically voluntary groundwater management. Many plans were adopted throughout the state under these programs, and they were also in 2000, AB 303 provided a lot of assistance, financial assistance to many of these agencies to either finish implementing or to work on various projects that they needed to work on for recharge and things of that nature. Then it was in the middle, in 2002, SB 1938 came along. That had more required components, and it was a much more significant step in groundwater management. In order to be eligible for groundwater-related grant funds, you had to have a groundwater management plan that met these specific elements. 2009, CASGEM came along to try to pull together a lot of the monitoring efforts and bring it all into a centralized database. And at the same time that was when Basin Prioritization came along. In 2011, groundwater management plans were required to map recharge areas, and also groundwater management plans were required to be submitted to DWR. That's important because when we go into some of the groundwater management, you know, one of the things that we struggled with throughout that whole process was basically access to a lot of these plans, because prior to 2011 they were not required to be submitted, so we had to go out and find many of them. And then, of course, you're all aware, in 2014 was the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, also known as SGMA, was adopted. Groundwater management. This is the statewide view, so it gives us a little bit more overall view of what's going on. We basically, as of August 2012, acquired 119 plans throughout the state. We broke them up into two groups, and they were post SB 1938, meaning these were plans basically generated 2002 or younger, and they were basically created to approach the SB 1938 required components. Prior to that, they were also known as pre-SB 1938, which were all just basically voluntary components that were part of AB 3030. This map on the left-hand side, the light green are the SB 1938 plans. The dark green are all the plans that were adopted prior to SB 1938. We did not assess those plans prior to SB 1938. We did assess 82 plans. Of those, only 17% of them, 35 of them met all the required components of SB 1938, and that represented 17% of the total basin area. These pie charts at the bottom on the right-hand side was the breakdown of those required components of basin management objectives, agency cooperation, agency maps, monitoring protocols, and then we took a look at combining them all to see how they all fared as a whole. As you can see, basin management objectives, it was roughly 50-50 between those that actually met all the basin management objectives versus partially meeting it. There was 3 or 4 components of that, and if they got 1, 2, or 3 of the 4, then we gave them a partial. Or they didn't even attempt at it. So that was 9% of the plans didn't even attempt to create basin management objectives. Agency cooperation was much more successful. 95% of the plans met the requirement for agency cooperation. And maps, there were 3 components. 81% of them provided all 3 components. Monitoring protocols, which is similar to the basin management objectives, roughly 50-50. And overall, 57% of the plans did not meet all the components, while 43% did. San Francisco, we looked at 4 plans. 3 were SB 1938, and only 2 of them at the time met all the requirements. Several more plans have come in that area since then, and some have been updated. South Coast, few more plans, 15 of them, and 11 of them were considered SB 1938. And only 7 of those met all the requirements. Sacramento River, many more plans. This area was a lot of fun to go through all those plans. 28 of those 38 were actually SB 1938, and that's represented there by the light yellow. And 13 of those plans addressed all of the SB 1938 requirements. Groundwater adjudications. We're only going to look at this from the statewide because only the South Coast really has most of all the adjudications. But anyway, for the sake of this conversation, groundwater adjudications, the first thing we need to do is define what we were looking for in groundwater adjudications. These are court-established restrictions on groundwater extraction within a basin, basins, or a portion of a basin. We tend to like to say there's 24 adjudicated basins, but really there's 24 groundwater adjudications because there's more basins than 24. Bulletin 118 identified 19 groundwater adjudications. Like I said, we use Bulletin 118 as a good starting point for a lot of the work we did for this particular report. And in California Water Plan Update 2013, we increased that number to 24. There are probably 2 or 3 more out there that are pending, but until they actually finalize their adjudication, they're not on the list at this point. Again, most of the adjudications are down here in the South Coast. We have a few up the coastline here and one up in North Coast, which is actually a stream system that is a little bit different than all the other ones because it's only represented 500 feet from the river, is within 500 feet of the river is being adjudicated. And you can always get the latest information at our Groundwater Information Center website under Groundwater Management. Groundwater Management under Ordinances. We surveyed all 58 counties as of 2012 and basically created a chart very similar to the one on the right. We looked at groundwater management, let me back up a little bit. When we grabbed all those ordinances, we characterized each one in one of those 6 different categories: groundwater management, guidance committees, export permits, ordinances concerning recharge, well abandonment, destruction, and well construction policies. The most common were the well policies. By far, 90% of all the ordinances that we found out there were related to well abandonment, well construction policies. And the least common were groundwater management related and guidance committees. San Francisco Bay, again, most of those counties right there all have well abandonment or well construction policies, but we only detected one ordinance concerning guidance committees. South Coast. This is another chart we created down there, and they had a few more that were related to groundwater management, and they had one on recharge, but again, most of the ones that we found were related to well abandonment and well construction. Sacramento River, quite a few more counties. As you can see, it's almost unanimous with the well abandonment and the well construction policies, and we had quite a few export permit ordinances, much more prominent than anywhere else in the state. And then we had a few more groundwater management and guidance committee ordinances. Groundwater ordinances, in a general sense, are constantly evolving and changing. So this is just a snapshot in time as of August 2012. Groundwater management comes in other forms as well. There was information in Bulletin 118 on special act districts. For this report, we didn't really focus on special act districts, but rather the groundwater management that they performed. Many of these act districts were given the authorization to create or perform groundwater management, and we wanted to know what they were doing with respect to the management, not the fact that they had the permission to do so. And then there's also other groundwater management efforts with integrated regional water management plans throughout the state, and there's 49 regions. There's urban water management plans all over the place, as well as ag water management plans. Conjunctive management inventory. The majority of all the conjunctive management that we were able to identify through the water plan efforts were in the Tulare Lake and the South Coast. There was a few scattered around the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as San Joaquin, and some up in the lower part of the Sac River. For this presentation, we're only focusing on the statewide view here. There'll be an appendices that will be released in the next presentation that will go into more detail of these 89 responses that we received from the survey. Each of the hydrologic region has recommendations that we performed when we did the analysis. So we identified findings for each of the regions that dealt with groundwater supply and development, groundwater use, aquifer conditions, what monitoring was occurring in those regions, as well as the status of groundwater management, any conjunctive management that was occurring. Majority of all the hydrologic regions, when we discussed the data gaps, it was on data collection and analysis. There were basin assessments was another gap, meaning limited knowledge on those particular basins, as well as sustainable management that was going on or not going on. Recommendations were similar to statewide, but each one was HR, hydrologic region specific. The statewide recommendations, obviously public education was extremely important to understand more about groundwater. We needed to see more collaboration and coordination among agencies. We also wanted to develop a website, which we have, and to promote a lot more access to information or consolidated so you don't have to run all over the place to find out more stuff. That website is in place. It's on the DWR website, which we'll see here shortly, as well as essential data to enable groundwater management by expanding the CASGEM program. We want to improve the understanding of the high and medium priority basins through basin assessments, and we want to also develop a sustainability plan for evaluation and implementation. Sustainable groundwater management within the framework of integrated water management is extremely important, and we'd like to see that advance over time. And then we want to review and assist local agencies in developing and improving analytical tools such as modeling and data collection, things of that nature, so that they can assess any conjunctive management and assess their management strategies. And then we also want to look into increasing groundwater recharge and storage. All these updates from statewide and all the hydrologic regions can be found on the Groundwater Update webpage. Here's the website where you can access all this. And also, as these webinars come up, if you want a notice of these, please subscribe to the Water Plan e-news, and you'll get all the heads up on the next webinars relating to the remaining hydrologic regions, as well as the appendices. Just to plug the new Groundwater Information website, this is at water.ca.gov/groundwater. And from there, you can jump into Sustainable Groundwater Management website, where you can get all the legislation, where you can find out information on GSAs, Groundwater Sustainability Agencies, and Groundwater Sustainability Plans, GSPs. We also have the Groundwater Information Center, where you can get all the latest and greatest information on all the groundwater information granted. The California Water Plan Update 2013 is a snapshot in time. Groundwater is very dynamic, so we need to understand that the data is always changing, so you can obtain all the latest and greatest information always at the Groundwater Information Center, as well as access to the CASGEM program and Bulletin 118. This is just a small snapshot of where you can get some of this information. We have interactive maps that will allow you to look at the latest the data that we received. It was just released with the spring 2014 data now, so you can create your own contours, look at groundwater levels, and various other apps, but just by selecting the different data sets. We've updated a lot of the information, so you'll find more updated maps in our drought report, as you can see here, as well as reports that you can find on the Groundwater Information Center and the drought website. The next webinar, well, it's on June 4th, we talked about Tulare Lake, San Joaquin, and Central Coast. Today was the Sac River, San Francisco Bay, and South Coast. Coming up on August 26th, we'll be discussing North Coast, Colorado River, and North and South Lahontan, along with reviewing the various technical appendices. Well, this is the end of my slides.
Roy, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. If you're out in the audience and you want to give Roy some virtual applause, go ahead and go to your keypad that has the little hand up and go ahead and give him some virtual applause. So thank you. That was great. We do have a Q&A, but I noticed we had a couple of legislative questions. So since we're here, I think I'll go ahead and take those. The first one had to do with the legislative change that required DWR to look at local habitat and stream corridor impacts. What legislation required that, and when did that happen?
That happened during the. Oh, go ahead, Roy.
Go ahead. I'll let you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is Dan McManus, and that happened during the SGMA legislation. It was added on as part of the requirement for the high and medium basin to be included in SGMA. So that's when that happened. Okay,
great. And then the other one, this one, by the way, it's punctuated. It looks like it's maybe also an editorial comment, but it says SB 2938 did not require DWR or other statewide review of plans, ? No review until now, ? So they're just curious about.
Right, and Roy, feel free to jump in here, but one of the intents behind reviewing those plans, we understood that we didn't really have the authority to actually make, decisions regarding whether these plans passed or failed, but we also had a need to try to understand better what was going on with groundwater management and what areas were succeeding and which ones were having some challenges, because we knew that there were challenges out there. So this review really kind of opened our eyes as to what aspects were working, what weren't working, and what maybe changes were needed down the road.
Okay, thank you. And then there was also a couple of questions just about the data. It seems like it's old, or what's going on with the time frame of the data?
So yeah, so the water plan is in 5-year increments, and it's always, we're running a little bit behind because you can't analyze and report on the data instantaneously. So it goes in 5-year segments. This segment for this plan, went through 2010, right? So that's why the data that we had analyzed for the most part went through 2010. For some of the things like the assessment of the management plans and those types of things, we tried to get as current as we could, but 2012 was about the latest cutoff we could do and still make the publication deadline.
Okay, so how soon will people be able to see this new information?
Well, actually, some of it's available right now. Last year we came out with 2 reports associated with the drought, and there's some update of some of the data that was in the water plan has been updated, and it's available on our website. And as we move forward, we plan on publishing additional updated information. I think we just posted to our Groundwater Information Center the summer results of the summer monitoring for the Sac Valley and the spring monitoring for some other areas. So we are keeping up with the updates. It's just it's not in publication form. You got to go to the website to get the latest and greatest.
Okay, that's great though, so people can access it then if they want it.
Absolutely.
Super. All right, we're starting to get some additional technical questions. I'll go ahead and take those up during the question and answer. If you have questions, please go ahead and send them in. We'll have a nice little chunk of time to do that. So, Dan, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and could you introduce yourself again?
Sure. My name's Dan McManus. I'm a DWR engineering geologist and worked with Abdul Khan as a co-lead on this effort for the water plan, and then also now I'm working with the DWR's implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Program. And big thanks to Roy for presenting just a lot of detailed information on those 3 hydrologic regions. I know it's tough to capture it all in a short period of time, but good job there. So since Yeah, so we talked about updating, and since the publication of the water plan report, there's been quite a bit of activity concerning groundwater and groundwater management. You know, first bullet here is the California Water Action Plan that came out in January of 2014. We also had, as we mentioned, Paul mentioned, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act came out in September. That was a series of 3 different bills. And then as part of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, DWR was highlighted in that act to do a number of things, and so we've developed our own Sustainable Groundwater Management program to implement those aspects of the of SGMA. And so first of all, just briefly on the California Water Action Plan, this is really a great document as far as aligning our state agencies to kind of be working towards the same goals and objectives. It's a 5-year plan towards sustainable groundwater management. In that plan, it had a number of actions, but one of them was specifically directed towards groundwater, and it talked about expanding the groundwater storage capacity and improving groundwater management. And then, of course, we had the SGMA legislation, which, you know, the intent there really wasn't to impose, you know, further requirements necessarily, but really to give an opportunity to let the locals manage groundwater locally, and give them tools and resources to do that. So one of the things that was good to see too, and it kind of you know, relates back to the importance of the California Water Plan groundwater update, was the nexus with the California Water Action Plan and SGMA, with the recommendations from our California groundwater update. And there were a number of the ones highlighted here in yellow were kind of the nexus with those 2 documents. And so it was good to see that you know, these were moving forward, and actually a lot of them were incorporated into the SGMA legislation. So if you look at SGMA, just a quick overview, you know, our department is kind of broken into 3 general areas. We see the general framework, which is identifying you know, who's applicable to be doing the sustainable groundwater management plans and when they need to be done. Has the definitions associated with sustainable groundwater management. And then there's a large section on the local role with establishing their groundwater sustainability agencies, which we're calling GSAs. It also, as I mentioned, highlights some new powers and authorities they have to implement plans, and then the deadlines associated with that. And then also there's the state role, which is really providing, implementing some of these regulations to help guide the locals in doing management, but also providing technical assistance and evaluation of what's happening. And then, you know, if things don't go quite as we hope they will, providing a backstop for state intervention to make sure we are seeing sustainable groundwater management in the future. So a couple of definitions. I'm not going to go through very many, but there, you know, there's quite a few listed in the Water Code, so I encourage you to go look at those. But sustainable groundwater management was defined as the management and use of groundwater in a manner that can be maintained during the planning and implementation horizon without causing undesirable results. And we are fortunate in that they also provided some indication of what undesirable results were, and those were conditions indicating significant and unreasonable either lowering of groundwater levels, reduction in groundwater storage, seawater intrusion, water quality degradation, land subsidence, and depletion of surface water. So that kind of painted the background and picture for what we need to implement as far as regulations looking at groundwater sustainability plans. It's a timeline that's available on our website and also in our groundwater sustainability strategic plan. I know you can't read this, but I just I'm going to blow up here and talk about some of these near-term deadlines that are coming up.
The fine print?
Yes, just fine print. But the thing, I encourage you to go online and look at it, because what's nice about it is kind of color-coded in that we have, in blue here, we have water board actions. In kind of the orange, we have DWR actions. And then in green are actions that are required of local agencies. And just with the blow up, you can see that you know, some of the actions DWR is kind of really front loaded on this SGMA legislation, in that you know, as of January 31st, we had to release the initial basin prioritization. We also have to identify basins subject to conditions of critical overdraft, and then by January just around the corner, 2016, we have to adopt regulations to revise the basin boundaries. And then shortly after that, we have regulations for how we're going to evaluate the groundwater sustainability plans or alternative plans. And then a little bit later in the same year, we have to publish a report on the water available for groundwater replenishment. So as you can see, we're pretty busy for the next few years.
You know, I might mention, because we were laughing about it and being a little hard to read, but these are going to be posted online.
They are. And I will provide some links coming up, and the presentation will be available after the webinar, so you can go there and look at some more detailed information. And similar to what Roy, the challenges he was facing with trying to provide a lot of detailed information in a short period of time, I'm not going to be able to go into detail on all of our activities, but much of that is available online at our website, and I'll present that in a second here. So as part of DWR's responsibilities, we, for implementing SGMA, we developed a groundwater sustainability program strategic plan. We came out with that earlier this year and have been taking comments through June. This is going to be somewhat of a living document, and currently we're incorporating the comments we received, and we'll probably come out with a revised edition sometime this fall. But as I mentioned, as we work through the process, our strategic plan will probably change somewhat as we move along. With our strategic plan, really it's divided into 5 main objectives for implementing the program. And each one of these objectives really is a series of actions, and I encourage you to go look at the plan, and it will highlight specifically what all those actions are. But for instance, developing the framework for sustainable groundwater management. This is where the department develops the regulations for basin boundary changes and GSP implementation. Technical assistance, this is some of the work we're going to be doing with providing the data and collecting data on a regional scale so folks have that to use. Providing statewide planning assistance. This is where we're going to work towards taking our Bulletin 118, which is kind of an update of California Groundwater, and incorporating that into our Bulletin 160, the California Water Plan, on a regular basis, so those two are more integrated. And then, of course, we have alignment with the state and providing financial assistance, and this is where we're going to be, we have some financial assistance for facilitation for folks trying to form their GSAs and develop GSPs, and then also be working to provide funding that has been provided by Prop 1. And then interregional assistance is really doing some of the other studies we have to do, such as looking at the surface water supply that's available for groundwater replenishment. Our communication outreach program is also pretty robust, and it kind of takes into account the fact that we want to do some broad-scale public meetings to receive input and ideas on what folks believe are the issues, but also, we have a need for some more focused one-on-one meetings with advisory panels and agencies and organizations. So this communication outreach plan, we feel, touches and provides the opportunity for one-on-one meetings as well as statewide public meetings and advisory panel meetings. Basin boundary regulations. So as I mentioned, we're going to, I want to focus on the time we have just on a couple of the regulations we're doing. One of those is basin boundaries, and the other one is the regulations for the groundwater sustainability plans. And this graphic here shows our general process for implementing these regulations. It's going to be the same for both the basin boundary and the sustainability plans. And it starts with really with a scoping and collecting the issues that I mentioned, through our communication process and coordinating with the state board. And then after the initial scoping, we develop a kind of a draft framework or more of a kind of guiding principles. And we publish those online at our site, and then we receive more feedback through our public listening sessions. And then we draft, actually, emergency regulations and post those publicly for people to provide comments, make edits as needed, and then finally go to the California Water Commission for approval, and then noticing to the Office of Administrative Law. And of course, during this whole process, we're working with the California Water Commission and State Water Resource Control Board to get their input and feedback. And so just a more detailed timeline of the basin boundary regulations. Currently, we're here on July 15th. We've already drafted the draft principles, and had a number of listening sessions and outreach. And we've met with the Water Commission on July 15, and we've posted our draft regulations. So those are online currently, and there's going to be a couple-month comment period. You'll be able to look at those and provide detailed comments. On August 19th, we're going to go back to the Water Commission with a more detailed presentation, really diving into those regulations. And then we're going to head into a series of public meetings where we'll do the same thing and receive public input and comment with the goal of, as I mentioned, adopting those regulations sometime, hopefully in October, November, submitting them to the Office of Administrative Law, and finally getting them posted. And what that will do, that will trigger on January 1st the opportunity for folks who feel like they need to adjust their basin boundaries to better implement the SGMA legislation. It gives them the opportunity to do that, and we'll be reviewing that and providing feedback there. So once again, just to provide input on the basin boundary regulations, you can go to our website, and we actually have a tab for the regulations. It'll have an area where you can comment, and it also will notify folks of all the public outreach meetings and the dates that we have listed here. There's also an opportunity to sign up to receive email notices when these meetings are going to be held. So the groundwater sustainability plans and alternative plans. So this is a much bigger effort, not to diminish the basin boundary regulations, but there's a lot of aspects to be covered. And one of the ways we decided to do that is to kind of break it into these different topics. And we have 10 different topics on our wheel of sustainability, as we're kind of affectionately calling this. And what we're doing is we're going to have a series of meetings associated with these different colored topics, kind of group them into 3 meetings, as you see here with the dates, and start our public outreach and getting feedback and input so we can shortly develop our guiding principles and post those so we can receive further input. As far as the process for the groundwater sustainability plan regulations, we've gone through some of the scoping. We're right here now. We're still drafting the framework and guiding principles. We need to present that last batch of topics coming up here next month, and then we're going to go into actually developing the draft regulations and having our public meeting similar to the basin boundary regulations. And then kind of a more detailed timeline for that process is right now, you know, we're doing this outreach, and public listening sessions are coming up, and then we're going to, sometime before December, we'll have our draft regulations, and then we'll have our public meetings between the January-February period with a California Water Commission meeting in March, and then final regulations hopefully adopted in April of 2016, and then submitting them to the Office of Administrative Law in May. And all during this time period, you know, we are doing almost monthly updates to the Water Commission. So I encourage you to go to those meetings or go online and get the information there. And then just some additional information. We talked about some websites. We have a statewide sustainable groundwater management website that we're contributing to, but then we also have our email list where you can get information, basin boundary regulations, information posted here. The groundwater management planning tool is another nice tool for those folks considering becoming sustainability agencies or wanting to look at what agencies are in their area. And then overall comments can be provided to this email address. And with that, I guess we're good for questions.
Ready for questions. Okay. Great. Well, we have had a couple of questions come in, and if you have a question, please go ahead and get it typed in. We do have some time to do that. The first question has to do with the source of your data. So you're performing analysis on a variety of monitoring records. Are those things that are submitted voluntarily, or does DWR have a secure method that they're acquiring that directly?
So I'm not sure if they're referring to the well completion report data that Roy showed, or just our groundwater level monitoring
A question came in during the well completion.
Okay. So yeah, the well completion reports, by law, drillers are supposed to submit their well completion reports to the department within 60 days of drilling the well. Unfortunately, we don't get that quite that good a turnaround, but we do have pretty good response. And so what this was an attempt to compile those well log reports and try to categorize them by well type and by region, and really show folks how the wells are being installed in California over what period of time, and any trends that might be associated with those.
Okay.
And oh, sorry, and you know, of course, the legislation I believe just passed that we're going to have well completion reports are going to be public now. So that data, we also are working on a online program that for the drillers to submit their well completion reports, and then in turn we're scanning and we'll be posting all of our archived well completion reports for the public to have those available to review.
Okay, thank you. Now this is a question about the contour tools, and as it was shown on the slideshow, it showed that the contours for the groundwater was above and below the Corcoran clay simultaneously, and they were just wondering, is that an accurate representation of the groundwater? Is that actually what's happening?
Yeah, so we tried to, in the areas where wells were specifically screened just below the Corcoran clay, we we pulled that data out and did not contour it, because typically those wells are under pressure, and it's a different process you use for calculating change in storage. But what we're seeing is a number of the wells are actually not only in the San Joaquin but in the Sacramento Valley are drilled through multiple aquifer zones, and they're screened through multiple zones. So we see a mixing, and when you actually look at the groundwater levels, they compare fairly well to the unconfined aquifer. So when possible, we use those combination wells as well as the unconfined zone.
Okay, thank you. So the next one has to do with the draft emergency basin boundary regulations. And the questioner was asking, will those be posted as you're receiving them so other people can see what questions have been asked?
Yeah, so we're talking, just last week we had a discussion on how to post those comments and what to do. And I believe the consensus is, yeah, we will post those as we go through and get them. We're certainly going to, make a list of them, and as you submit your email with your comments, you'll receive another email back acknowledging that they've been received and that we're tracking them. So we will be tracking those and we're likely posting those.
So you mentioned it already, but when exactly does that close, the comment?
60 days from July 15th.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the idea being that people can kind of see what other people are saying, and then that will help inform what they say. And
exactly. And then also, as I mentioned, August 19th, we'll be doing another detailed presentation at the Water Commission. So it'll give you another opportunity to kind of get in and see what's happening and then provide feedback there. One of those other early implementation tasks that we were assigned is identifying basins subject to critical conditions of overdraft. And I didn't go through that much detail, but we are currently, we've selected those basins. We're in contact with the managers in those groundwater basins to talk about our findings. And we're going to have some back and forth discussions there, but with the idea that at that same August 19th meeting for the Water Commission, we'll be presenting the findings of those basins, so those will be available for the public also.
Great. Now, when is the CASGEM prioritization calculations? Are they being recalibrated to capture other basins that are not included initially, as you have the sort of medium-high, and if the prioritization is upgraded, how does that all work with Sigma?
Yeah, so it gets a little complicated, but since we have basin size is so variable, we have some very large basins and we have some smaller basins. Most of the data that we had 8 different components that were used to identify basin priority. That data had to be normalized either by area or by population by area, and those types of things. So whenever you change the basin boundary and the size of the basin change, we have to go back and recalculate the basin prioritization. And in fact, the legislation requires that too. So the thought is once we get our basin boundary regulations done and we get the changes that we're going to have moving forward, that we'll go back and recalculate the basin prioritization, and at that point include that additional component number 8, which is impacts to stream flow and habitat. And so yes, we could end up probably with some basins that are currently low, maybe moving up into medium priority, and that type of thing. I'm not expecting there to be hugely significant changes, but some of those are going to depend really on how the basin boundaries get changed.
Okay. So this is part of the water plan process, and one of the other things that happens in the water plan is the development of regional reports.
Right.
So there's some sort of an integration space here. Is it possible to pull out the information regarding confined aquifers from the data in the regional reports? I'm thinking places like Butte, people like that have sort of slightly different physical characteristics.
Yeah, we're as much as possible, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to build upon the past data analysis that we've had and use that data. So we certainly are going to be going back and looking at that data. But I'm sure if you're directing it towards basin prioritization, but in addition, to identify impacts to habitat and stream flow, we'll be working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and some other agencies to make sure we've captured all the data associated with that variable, and that that the process we use to evaluate that makes sense.
Okay. And then we have Abdul Khan. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Abdul, and he needs a mic. So.
Yeah, good morning. This is Abdul Khan, and I really would like to welcome and thank you all for attending this webinar. I just want to add what John just said. Under SGMA, there is another process going on, which is the Bulletin 118 process. And there will be an interim update of Bulletin 118 in 2017, and then again another complete update in 2020, and then every 5 years from 2020. And I think one of the things what will happen as part of the Bulletin the 118 process is a lot of the information which was developed for water plan through this report and through this process will be used as foundational information. And many of the things you see here will probably be tackled in a little bit more detail under the Bulletin 118 process.
Great.
Including confined aquifer and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, the person who posed the questions very active in the water plan process, and I think looking for that integration, and I know, Paul, that's one of the things that you've been thinking about, how do we get the regional reports and the groundwater and everything to work together. Did you have any comments on that?
Oh, just that's the concept going forward for the next water plan, which will be released and updated in 2018 as well. So yes, the intent is to thoroughly explore and implement all the opportunities for integrating this groundwater information.
So that nice cross-hatching.
Yes.
Yeah, I think originally, if you look at the water code, the Bulletin 118 is supposed to come out a couple years prior to the California Water Plan, and so that data then is able to be incorporated into the plan and make sure that we get back on track there. But also the legislation says that anytime we update the basin boundaries, they have to be memorialized in Bulletin 118, and that's why we're doing the interim update in 2017, not only just to memorialize those basin boundaries so everybody is on track there, but also do some of the things that Abdul talked about, is really lay out the approach for future Bulletin 118s moving forward and how they'll be integrated into the water plan. So hopefully the 2017 interim update will answer a lot of those questions.
One of the questions is about why there seems to be some level of secrecy around groundwater information. So they've noticed that things are redacted and people aren't talking. And can you help us understand a little bit why is it that there isn't more transparency about some of the groundwater data?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Probably some of it gets back to the California and the just kind of the general Wild West mentality and independence, I guess I should say, that the people feel out here, and some of it's appropriate. But I think as we move forward with sharing the data for those basins and agencies that are have started to do that, they're really realizing the value of not just sharing their data, but being able to evaluate what other folks are doing and how they're looking at their data and getting some ideas there. So it's just one of those things that I think people are concerned, if they share the data that maybe the state's going to come in and intervene, but yet from a state perspective, we also have the requirement to be able to evaluate to some degree the status of groundwater management in California. So there's going to be a little give and take as we move through the process, but certainly the SGMA legislation is going to go a long ways towards making sure that there's a greater transparency of that data moving forward.
Thank you. Now, this next question is a little bit complicated, so I'll kind of walk through it a little slowly. So this has to do right now in the coastal zones in particular, when you're looking at stream corridors and habitat and that sort of relationship between the groundwater and what's happening at the surface level, and you're thinking about issues like seawater intrusion and those kinds of things, how is it that that's not just showing up more strongly kind of in the analysis?
So yeah, for one, it's a very complicated analysis. It's very difficult to physically measure, the surface water groundwater interaction. You can, but it's oftentimes you end up within the range of, the margin of error for that typical analysis. So it typically requires modeling, to be done, and so anyway, I guess just in summary, it's fairly complicated and sophisticated analysis that I think a lot of basins haven't performed unless they've really needed to, because they are experiencing seawater intrusion and those types of things. So, but moving forward, that is an aspect of SGMA, is that they evaluate their surface groundwater interaction, and as a department, it's also our job to help provide technical assistance and ways to do that. So we're hoping to provide some direction there, and maybe even some regional scale models that people could look at. But it's I don't think it's a function of trying to hide that data. It's just like I said, it's more of a complication of actually coming up with that analysis.
And then the second part of the question, I mentioned it's a complex question. The second part is if we know that there could be impacts to habitat and the fishery and those kinds of things, how does that relate? Right now, the CASGEM prioritization seems to really be weighted just into the way you're calculating it. Is there a way to better emphasize some of those larger sustainability issues in the actual prioritization? Right,
and I think it's important to keep in mind that the prioritization was meant to focus on the importance of groundwater statewide for the basins, but certainly there is an opportunity to look at it more detail. The way the legislation is written, that particular component is just one of 8 components that we were instructed to consider together. So currently it's going to have equal consideration to the other 8, and I think it will make a difference, but it's not certainly going to take very low priority basins and raise them to a priority level necessarily that they would have to implement SGMA. But I think there are other tools for doing that, which is your regional planning, your general planning, ways there you can protect the stream groundwater corridor. So it's going to be significant in that it is going to add that level of analysis for surface water groundwater interaction, but it's not meant to really cover all aspects of that. I think there are other ways people can do that with studies.
Yes.
I think this is a very good question, and I don't know who previously stated this, but I think this question essentially, sort of like make us realize that we cannot consider groundwater sustainability without considering the water sustainability issue. And groundwater sustainability is only very important, but is a component of the overall water sustainability. And I hope that we have started that process as part of up to 2013. coming up with the sustainability indicators framework. I hope that as part of update 2018, and I believe we will advance, this overall water sustainability concept, where groundwater sustainability will be an integral and a very important component.
Yeah, that's a great point, Abdul. I mean, for years, the groundwater law and the surface water law have been separate, and I think with SGMA and some other efforts moving forward, we will see a greater integration and requirement for people to consider one versus the other when doing their management.
Well, we are at the end of our session. There are a couple of people, and as mentioned, that last question was really, really complicated. There are like 3 more parts to it. So for the person that asked that question, I'm going to actually send you a note, and we'll get on the phone. I think that would be easier just to go ahead and walk through the pieces of it. And then there was one other question about groundwater recharge rates, and I'll go ahead and send you guys an email, and you can get back to the person that asked that. So thank you to everyone that has joined us. Once again, I think we've had a tremendous session. If you're online and you can give this crew another round of applause, I think that would be greatly appreciated. And we send you out to the rest of your day. Hope you have a great day. We're looking forward to seeing you again on what date's our next webinar? August 26th. I will mention I've got about 136 people already registered for that. So, get in early before all the spots are gone. So be sure to get signed up. Thank you to all of you that.
That will be a 2.5-hour session.
Oh, right.
The 1-hour session on the change in storage tool.
The change in storage tool, that is going to be a hot ticket. So you definitely want to get registered early. You don't want to lose your seat on that one. So change in storage, see you on the 26th. Thanks everyone for joining us.